Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into Gamecock Pod Live for January the 29th, episode number 1678, brought to you by Nana's Porch, the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area. And with the Super Bowl coming up next weekend, February the 9th, you've got a full day to enjoy Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese. You've got South Carolina at Texas in women's basketball. That's the prelude into the Super Bowl pregame show. Then you've got the game between Dawn Staley's Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, Andy Reid. And so go to nanasporch.com. Look in the top right-hand corner and order plenty of Nana's Porch pimento cheese. Also, if you want them to cater your Super Bowl watch party, get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne, and that Nana's Porch pimento cheese delivered free of charge right to your front doorstep. Smoky jalapeno and the great regular flavor. It is a must for any Super Bowl watch party. That's nanasporch.com, N-A-N-A-S. And we welcome in off the top a sad and dejected Jack Veltri as the Buffalo Bills could not do it. I was sitting here with Addison watching the game. She's a huge Chiefs fan because she loves Patrick Mahomes. And, of course, she's a Swiftie. So, Taylor Swift, I was pulling for Buffalo. I thought they were going to pull it out. Jack, let's just admit, okay, Josh Allen got that first down on the last fourth and short.
He did, Keith, and I wasn't expecting the cold open with the Bills there. Why'd you have to do me like that? But no, man, it's he should have. It was a first down. There's no way around it. I mean, look, it's hard not to blame officiating when you got stuff like that happening, and you know the calls are pretty favorable for the Chiefs. But yeah, that whole call changed everything.
I mean, okay, granted, but at the same time, how many times are you going to keep running that quarterback sneak that was not working, that they were totally prepared for? I mean, I got to question Joe Brady on that. I mean, they just kept going to the well, and it really wasn't working. I mean, put him in the shotgun, let him run some option, have an RPO in there.
Yeah, I don't get it. And it's the same. It's the QB sneak to the left. He never goes to the right, which is mind-boggling to me. And the tush push exists, except Buffalo doesn't really run the traditional tush push where you have two 350-pound guys in the backfield behind Josh to push him forward. So that'd be like 700 pounds of man that you have to bring down, and that's going to be impossible. So I don't know why they don't run that, but you know what? I mean, it's the Chiefs, it's the Bills. You kind of know which way these games usually go in the playoffs, and it's the 13-second loss will never be beaten. That was by far the worst loss I've seen this team have. So it's it doesn't sting as much compared to those.
Yeah, I mean that one, that Tyreek Hill play.
Oh man, don't even remind me. That was rough.
I mean, were there like 4 or 5 touchdowns in the last 2 minutes of that game?
It was insane.
Nuts.
One of the best games of all time. I mean, it was crazy.
I mean, these two teams, they're always on collision course, and
yeah,
I mean, they win in the regular season, and then the postseason.
There's something about
close but no cigar.
Yeah.
Almost as bad as Gamecock men's basketball this week. Jack, we got to go there. South Carolina drops their 8th straight game. They are 0-8 in SEC play. And they've lost to probably the 2 worst teams on their schedule, Vanderbilt and now Georgia. They lost 71-60 last night. Just 2 players in double figures, Colin Murray Boyles. It was encouraging to see Jamari Thomas roll in 19 points off the bench. But this team just cannot shoot the ball. I mean, they are abysmal from 3. They were 24%. Jacoby Wright can't score at all. It appears, and I don't know at this point why Lamont Paris continues to roll him out there. His body language, it looks like he has no confidence whatsoever. And they lose again by double digits after, losing the 4 ranked opponents. Well, 3 ranked opponents at the buzzer. I just don't know. I mean, have we reached the point of no return for this men's basketball team?
Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. I mean, last night was just a microcosm of just the struggles that have been going on all season. And it comes at a time where Georgia, keep in mind, going into that game last night, had lost 4 straight. And South Carolina just continues to make the same mistakes over and over again. It's the 17 turnovers last night. It's the going near 8 minutes without a field goal in the first half. That is a stretch that allowed Georgia to make it from an 18-16 lead to having a 14-point lead going into halftime that they never relinquished again. And if you're South Carolina, it's just, I think you do start to question, all right, where do you make change? Because, at this point, you kind of are what you are. You're a turnover machine, and you don't have the guard play to consistently score. Let's be honest. You watched that game last night, especially in the early minutes, not just the turnovers, but you see the guards like Jacoby and Morris and Zach out there on the floor. They got the ball in their hands. Most times they should be able to create a shot. They just can't. It's not necessarily what Georgia's defense is doing. It's been like this all year where you kick it to the guys in the post in the front court, and whether it's Pringle or CMB, there's a few seconds left on the shot clock, and then Pringle or whoever goes up and they get blocked, and that's the end of the possession. So that's kind of what happened last night specifically. And with Jacoby, I think you do have to consider making a change. I think it's just, I asked Lamont about him last night, and I think he just needs to be more aggressive. That's thing number one. He's been around here for so long to where it's like you expect him to be better than he was last night. And it's just, he looks uncomfortable out there. Honestly, a lot of the guys do. Zach Davis really has not lived up to the potential of what we were hoping from him this year. He's had games where he's been great, but it's just never come together the way you thought. Morris has been hit or miss at times. Jamari has been, I think probably the most consistent guard. I know he's out for a little bit, but he's giving you the best stuff right now. It's just he's coming off the bench. Me personally, I think at some point, once you kind of get to the point in the season where you know you can always go on a run the SEC tournament and win the whole thing and go to March Madness. But if you're like at your point where you're like 0-13, 0-14, there's just no chance of you even turning this thing around and finishing above 500. I think you just kind of I don't really know if it's call off the boys or whatever, but just start playing some of these guys that you're going to have around for next year and beyond a little bit more to get them valuable experience. Like guys like Cam Scott, Jordan Butler, they've already played in multiple games. So it's not like they can use a redshirt or anything at this point with how the NCAA basketball rules work, where if you play in more than one game, then that's it. You can't redshirt. So might as well play those guys more to see what you got, because you're going to be losing pretty much, in my opinion, you'll probably end up losing your entire starting five after this season, because Jacoby's going to be gone. Zach's the guy that could come back. We'll see. I just don't know if they I don't even know if you'd really want him back, to be honest. I think he's better off letting him just go explore his other options. I think at some point you just got to start fresh, and I think you do begin that process by trying to play guys like Cam Scott, Butler, Arden Conyers. I know he plays a lot, but maybe throw him in the starting lineup. Just you got to see what you got for the future.
I agree. And so here's the thing so Colin Murray Boyles obviously still having a good season. He's going to be a first-round pick. Jamari Thomas, I think he's out of eligibility. We know, Miles Studi, who we probably won't see again because of the blood clots. Yeah. He's out of eligibility. Nick Pringle, though, with the JUCO rule. And so I want to pose the question. I want your input on this, because Nick Pringle's from South Carolina, but he's never played since high school in South Carolina. He went to junior college, then he went to Alabama. He was a part of a Final Four team. He was surrounded by a lot of NBA players. I really think he felt a lot of expectations coming back home. Number one, I think he felt the pressure to perform well to go to the NBA this year. I think he felt the pressure of being back in South Carolina and understanding there were going to be more expectations on him. And I just don't think he's ever relaxed. I mean, you just can't explain some of the stuff that has happened with Nick Pringle, dribbling the ball off your foot in the open floor going in for a dunk, having the offensive interference call at the end of the Mississippi State game, the slow start from the free throw line. I mean, do you think he's just really kind of felt the pressure and expectations that have been weighing on him, that a lot of it is self-imposed? Because I do think he felt like, hey, I can have a big year and be a first-round pick in the NBA draft. I do not think that is the case at this point.
Yeah, I mean, nothing that would make you feel that way from talking to him. Like, we spoke to him after the game last night, and he seems to be handling everything fine. Like, give him credit. Like, look, I think, honestly, Keith, more so than anyone else outside of probably like Lamont Paris or anything, from a player standpoint, I don't think anyone on this team has endured more of the team struggles than he has, because he's a guy that has been at the forefront of a lot of these close moments in games, where Mississippi State on Saturday was the pass that went to Arden Conyers in the corner on the missed free throw that could have led to maybe a game-tying three-point shot, but the ball goes off Conyers' hands and out of bounds. I think it was more of Conyers not catching the ball rather than Pringle making a bad pass, but that's just one example. And there have been other moments throughout the season, the Vanderbilt game where he got blocked on his shot at the end of the game, and he didn't get the rebound on the putback that gave Vanderbilt the win. So it's moments like that. There's others that stand out throughout the season. The missed free throws in the Auburn game I really feel for him because he's a good dude, honestly. Like I've enjoyed covering him. I mean, he's in the moments of these adverse situations, he still remains to be pretty positive. Like after the game last night, still talking about how they can, go on a run here and get this thing right. Which, I'm sure they just have to say that stuff, just PR and all that. But I mean, at the same time, it's like at some point, like things have got to go his way. Like, right? Like he's a good player. It just hasn't clicked for whatever reason this season. And I think a big part of it is you look at Georgia's big men last night. They had 5 block shots. Some of those came against Pringle in the paint, as I kind of alluded to earlier. But I felt like him and CMB were really outmatched going up against guys like Asa Newell for Georgia and then Dylan James off the bench. Like they just really didn't seem to be much competition in that aspect. I mean, CMB had his moments. He had an 18-point game with 2 blocks and 2 steals. Good night for him overall for the most part. But there were times in this game where it's like, how are you not grabbing that rebound? How are you not contesting that shot? It's things like that are kind of like, I see why South Carolina is a little bit where they're at. But yeah, a guy like Nick, with the whole JUCO situation, we haven't, to my knowledge, we haven't gotten a chance to ask LP about that yet, just because, I mean, honestly, during this losing streak, there hasn't been a good moment to even bring it up, to be honest, where we'd like a little bit more clarification on that thing, obviously. But we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously, Bam Martin-Scott the other day announced he's going to the turn pro and go to the draft and stuff. So, obviously, his JUCO situation didn't work out. So, we'll see what happens with Nick. It'd be good to have him back next year, but at the same time, his numbers are fine. But on the court, it's like, I still feel like it's just very inconsistent to me. I feel like South Carolina needs to just kind of with this season, kind of wipe the slate clean. No leftovers unless it's players that just haven't played much this year at all that are coming back with eligibility. But guys that could be gone for next year, I think you just got to let them move on and go from there.
I mean, losing CMB, I'd like to see Pringle come back. There's the Cam Scott conundrum, as I call it. I mean, this guy's had several DNPs in SEC play. Here's another guy, highly rated local guy, high expectations, supposed to be a gifted scorer, and he can't get on the court, and when he does, he's still playing less than 9 minutes per game in SEC play, but he's been unplayable in the close games that South Carolina has played. He got a little bit of run last night against Georgia, but not much. Morris Ugasuk, he can't handle the ball. We saw that against Florida. Mm-hmm. Teams are doing him just like they do Tahina Pau. They're just not letting her get open for 3 because Morris has been a good catch and shoot player. Georgia just did not allow him to have those catch and shoot opportunities. I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, and then you have a power forward who is your leading assist man on the season. And in particular in SEC play, the offense has to run through him. I think through all of this, the biggest thing to me, bottom line, is South Carolina's guards are not good enough. I mean, Jacoby Wright and Jamari Thomas both, to me, would be better served by being role players that only play 10 or 12 minutes per game. I mean, you just do not have the studs up and down the lineup, nor the depth. And Jeremiah Donati was on 107.5 the game, and he addressed that. He was asked about Lamont, obviously, who signed a huge contract extension. You really can't afford to fire him, but you don't want to fire him because the guy's proven he's a good coach. But they had too many misses and not enough hits in the transfer portal. Donati has said he's going to sit down with Lamont Paris, and he realizes they've got to help him with NIL and revenue share to bring in more players. I mean, the SEC's getting 12 teams in the NCAA tournament this year, and probably half of those are going to be 1, 2, or 3 seeds, according to an interview I heard yesterday with Jeff Goodman. I mean, it's true, regardless of the sport in the SEC, it's more about the Jimmies and Joes than the X's and O's.
No, totally. And it's good to see that Jeremiah, like, obviously, you can't fire LP right now. Like, number one, that's a whole headache in terms of buyout and stuff and money you got to worry about. And with South Carolina's track record of firing coaches and stuff, like, you know, they've had their share of buyouts from Frank and Muschamp to worry about in the past. So the last thing you want to do is add another lofty amount of money that you have to pay to someone on your plate. For a coach, it's a good coach at the end of the day. Like, look, say what you will about this season and stuff and how it's gone, but Lamont Paris is a good coach. Like, there's no way around it. It's just you're not having a good season, and that happens because, number one, the SEC is significantly better than last year. I don't think South Carolina is much worse than the teams in this conference. It's just there are so many times in games where, again, they've had really close losses. Like, they've lost by double digits. Let's see, at this point, 4 times. The other 4 games, they've lost by, 5 or less points. So they easily could be 4-4 in conference play right now, or a little bit worse, but they could be right in the thick of things, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation about, how bad the team is right now. Now, from a personnel standpoint, yes, you do need to pour more money into this men's basketball program. I'm going to be quite honest when I say this. I think men's basketball, and I don't know this for a fact, this is more so just the feeling I get, more so than anything. I think men's basketball kind of is on the back burner compared to the other sports that get the most attention when it comes to these things. Football, obviously, is going to get the most because it's the biggest money maker that any D1 program has, obviously. Women's basketball, I feel like, still gets more attention from the university compared to the men's team, and that's what winning does. That's what Dawn Staley brings to the table, and I have no problem with that. I'll even argue baseball gets more attention, which, for obvious reasons, should. But men's basketball, if you look at the pecking order, it probably feels like they're maybe somewhere around 4th on that list. And that's a problem considering, the SEC wasn't always like this. I saw something on College Game Day last week when they were out in Auburn that the SEC, I think, had maybe like 3 teams in the tournament like a decade ago. And now you look at it, they're going to be a double-digit bid league. Most likely end up with about 12 teams. And South Carolina isn't one of them. Coming off a season where you won 26 games and you made your first tournament appearance for the first time since the Final Four run, I mean, that's ridiculous, man. I mean, that's just something where I think, number one, you talk about the misses in the portal. That's going to happen. Like this time last year, we were talking about how good of a job Lamont did in bringing in BJ Mack and Talon Cooper. And the year before that, getting Gigi Jackson to commit. And then you also brought in Michi Johnson, all of those players who obviously were very impactful for South Carolina. So Lamont's done a good job with the whole recruiting, I think. It's just this year, it looks a lot worse because, quite frankly, most of your guys ended up being misses. I don't think Pringle or Thomas are bad players by any means, but in a season where you're under 500 now, it looks a lot more like this program did not do a good job of recruiting. And Cam Scott hasn't played a ton. I would like to see that change. Obviously, Jordan Butler hasn't really played much to show us anything. So it looks like they had a lot of misses, but I don't know. I think there's been moments where they've been fine. But again, they got to pour more money into this thing. You cannot be – when most of the teams in this conference are going to the tournament this year, that should be an eye-opener. And I'm glad it is for Jeremiah and company. And so I think you give this thing another year or two to see what can happen. I think Lamont isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And he brought the question yesterday, not to ramble on here, but do they have a talent gap? I think it's something that they do. I think it clearly is. Like, you see, South Carolina has talented players, but do they have enough to go in from a depth standpoint and roll different players out and expect good results. I don't think so, and that's something that they have to change. Pouring more money in isn't the solution necessarily. It's a good thing, but you have to be able, with that money, you have to be able to spend it right, and you have to be able to identify players. That's more so what it comes down to than anything else. You can have all the money in the world, but you spend it on players that don't do anything. That's the problem.
I mean, I don't think that was the case last year. I think they had a clear pecking order, particularly of guards that they wanted, but they could not compete financially. And hopefully that's the last time that happens. That happened to Shane Beamer a couple of years ago. It led to a 5-7 season, and we saw a lot of changes with South Carolina, the transfer portal. So, I mean, Butler's a young player. I think he probably could have been served by a redshirt year this year. Cam Scott's a young player. Arden Conyers, to me, has been the one bright spot from a redshirt freshman. I think he's manned up, but let's face it, when you go from G.G. Jackson, his impact, to Colin Murray Boyles and his impact as a freshman, and then you have the kind of the same expectations for Cam Scott. He has not delivered, and he clearly is not ready to be a one and done. Let's talk about the signing class. And so I'm going to include Oku Federico in that. He just got to campus this week, 6'10". He was supposed to have been the big prize from the two Finland players. Morris came a year early. It was thought last year he would redshirt because he was so thin, but he was good enough to be able to get some minutes. I don't think he was ready for the role he had to play this year. So Federico's a 6'10" guy that looks extremely gifted, but I mean, let's talk about Eli Ellis because he's listed at 6 foot, which generally, as a former high school coach, that probably means he's 5'10" and a half or 5'11". I know he's a YouTube sensation, but really, how good is that league? He's the top signee coming in. Is he ready to be an impact player in the SEC as a freshman?
I go back and forth on that. I think about that frequently enough to where, you know, with the losses and stuff, you kind of think about, okay, what's the future of this program going to look like? I really do like Eli Ellis. I think he's got the right mindset for coming to college. Like, I've seen him play now and stuff, and I think he's a great player, honestly. I think he's got such a good range from the floor where he can shoot, you know, obviously from pretty deep. That's not going to necessarily work in the SEC. Like, you can't be pulling up from, you know, near half court and just chucking up threes. That is not what this league is built on. That's surely not what Lamont Paris's system is going to be built on. So with him, he's a good player. Do not get me wrong. I think the concerns I have that make me feel like, okay, it would not be a bad idea to potentially redshirt unless you need him to play right away, is just the defense, I think, could be better, as well as, you know, going to the basket. There were a lot of times I saw him play maybe about back in December. It was, you know, one of those random tournaments or whatever, and he just, you know, he drives to the basket really well, but it's like he'll stop, he'll make a move to turn around, and he'll try going back up. That's the stuff that you see Georgia blocking a ton of shots last night. That's the stuff that's going to get blocked. You know, sometimes he'll end up making those shots because of the competition he's going against and stuff. He's able to maneuver and be shifty and stuff. That's the type of player he is. I just don't know how it's going to translate over completely. I think he's a good player. I think he could be really one of those guys that we look back on as one of the real gem type of signees for South Carolina that we've talked about for so long now, and I'm ready to see him play here next year. I'm not exactly sure because, you know, his play style is great and all for what it is right now, but it's going to have to change a little bit to some extent when he comes to South Carolina next year. But as for the rest of the guys, we'll see what happens. Hayden Essemian, I feel like he's got some room to grow from just he's 6'6", 235, but when you look at him, he's definitely smaller compared to other forwards and big men in the SEC. That's like, number one, you got to put on more weight. Like, get to like BBV weight maybe, and you're feeling pretty good. So I don't know. I think he could be fine. And then I have not gotten to see Walker or Polk play in person yet. I'll be very interested to see what they look like when they come on campus and stuff, and seeing them practice and whatnot during the summer. But for the two guys I can speak on for sure, with Hayden and Eli Ellis, I think Eli's going to be the guy that ends up potentially playing some minutes next year. But again, it could be like a situation like with Cam Scott and even Arden Conyers and Austin Hero last year, where maybe you just redshirt those guys.
I mean, Grant Polk is going to be a project. I don't know. Simeon is undersized. I mean, to me, they're going to have to really hit the portal. I mean,
they're going to have to, yes.
You're going to have to probably clear out some spots. All right, so Shane Beamer met with the media on Saturday. He introduced the Gamecock newcomers. 21 of the 26 members of the signing class are enrolled early. 2 guys that we were unsure about: 4-star safety Kendall Daniels Jr., 6'4", 205, and then 4-star offensive tackle Demola Adjadon from Duluth, Georgia. They make it in. 13 transfer portal guys. But maybe the biggest news to me is it appears wide receiver Nicholas Harbor is going to skip the spring track season and focus on football. I think that's big. I mean, it's big for his development, but it's big for this program because you got a bunch of freshman wide receivers coming in, but Harbor really showed some ability at the end of last season, and I think this is a great move for him because you just don't need to go 7 months without picking up a football and focusing on track. Your thoughts about him going through spring practice, summer workouts, and then fall camp with the team, how much that aid his development?
I was wondering not so much if this was going to happen, but when this was going to happen, because I thought at some point he was going to be one of those guys that, look, we've seen 2 sport athletes before, right? Your Bo Jacksons, your Deion Sanders, those guys. But in the more modern age of sports, I feel like it's a lot tougher to kind of dedicate your time to 2 separate things. I mean, for a guy like Nick, you knew he had like no time on his hands, to waste. It's like he goes from football right to track, and he's busy doing that for X amount of months, like you said. And for Nick, I mean, look, he showed some real flashes at the end of the season. Honestly, like, he's got the potential going into next year. I don't want to say he's going to be wide receiver number 1 or anything for sure, but I feel like he's got the potential to be that guy in the room that, you're not having Josh Simon back next year. You're going to be losing some other pieces in that offense. I feel like Nick, it's going to benefit him so much going through these workouts now, getting to go through spring practice, getting to continue to work on his ball catching and his routes and stuff, getting to go through a whole spring and stuff like that. It's going to be pivotal for him. It's going to be massive. And, look, the track stuff, here's the thing with that. I feel like that's a lot. I could be wrong on this, but I feel like it's a lot easier to probably pick that up. Let's say a few years down the line, if he wants to go, try to make the Olympics again, go for a run at that. I feel like he's more than capable of doing that because the speed isn't going away anytime soon. That's just God-given ability right there that he has. So he could probably pick that up when he's done with football and wanting to go do that. I think he'll have a career as in track and field well after college ends. But from a football standpoint, this is great for him. I think it's going to be huge for his development. And again, like I said, he's a guy that flashed at the end of the year. We see he does more than beyond the go route that everyone wanted him to run only after the video game came out, where it's, run 40 yards down the field and just go catch the ball. That happened a few times this year, but there were also moments where it's like he ran good routes and made nice plays. Like, I always think back to the Vanderbilt game where he caught that third down ball inside the goal line for like 30-something yards, and it's like, that's a good route he ran right there. The Watford game, he had nice plays. And even in the Illinois game, he was making some catches. So, overall, Nick, this is going to be big for his development. Junior year for him is a big season for him. I don't think he's going to be turning pro after the season or anything, but it's like, this is the year where he can actually start to get on the radar of teams at the next level if he wants to be a guy that eventually goes pro in the NFL. I'm not sure what he wants to do after college and stuff, whether it's go back to track or whatever the case might be, turn pro for football. But the point is, he's not. It's a good sign for Gamecock fans that this dude is deciding, I want to put my priorities into football and not do this whole, splitting your time up sort of thing.
I mean, I really thought it started for him in the Alabama game when he made that big touchdown catch at the end of the game. Then I was at Oklahoma. He made a couple of big-time catches in that game. And then you saw it against Vanderbilt on the sideline when he just trucked those two guys to get extra yardage instead of stepping out of bounds. And then, the Missouri game, he had a big game. And then, like you said, the Wofford game, the Clemson game, the Illinois game, he was making really impressive catches on breaking off the out route, on routes over the middle. I mean, going up and getting the ball with his hands, securing it like you want to see a wide receiver do. I mean, let's face it, Mike Furry, he is probably the hottest assistant at South Carolina right now with what he did with essentially a group of journeymen last year. Now he's got an extremely impressive group of true freshmen coming in. They're going to have those guys for winter and spring. Then they can make a decision if they want to invest in another wide receiver. But quite frankly, I don't know that they're going to need to.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to need to necessarily either, because you're having Mazeo Bennett come back. Jared Brown's coming back. Obviously, Nick is coming back. You have a boatload of freshmen coming in. And I was going to ask Shane about that during that media availability. I ended up asking about how things went in the portal and whatnot, which led into my eventual what I was going to ask about the wide receiver room. And, they didn't get a receiver in the transfer portal. And that's by design because, they felt like, number one, some guys just weren't fitting what they were looking to do in terms of the things that they're about. But also, like, they have enough guys in that room from freshmen and guys coming back to where it's like you don't even really need to bring another guy in right now. That could change after the spring cycle or the spring practice ends and stuff in April, and the portal opens again and you got 10 days to kind of make a decision. That's what we saw last year with Vandrevius Jacobs and Dale Von Campbell brought in two guys and Jacobs is coming back next year too. Forgot about him. It's that opportunity, that 10 days where you can kind of reassess and reevaluate, where it's not just wide receiver, other positions too, where if you feel like you need something else, go ahead and go get a guy in the portal now. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Carolina adds another vet in that room for sure. I feel like you probably need one more guy, maybe. But you have enough talent in there. And don't forget the tight ends too. Like Mike Smith, I think, is going to have a really nice year. I expect Brady Hunt to, with Josh Simon not around anymore, I expect Brady to have more of an impactful role this season. And we'll see, man. I like what they've got cooking in there. A lot of unknowns maybe in some respects with a lot of freshmen in there, but it's an opportunity for guys to step up. And the spring will be very interesting to see how these guys do.
No doubt about it. All right, last question before I let you go. Give me one or two transfer portal impacts on defense and on offense.
Let's see. So on offense, I'm going to start out at the running back position with Rasul Faison. I think he's going to be a guy that you need to watch out for. I think he's going to be someone that could really be impactful for this team this season. Now, who wins the running back job kind of is where this all comes down to. But I think if Faison, you bring him in, he's a Utah State guy, kind of a journeyman, to be honest. I think he's a guy that can go out here, and if he wins the running back job or even splits carries with Oscar Attaway, you see him do some really good things. I like what he brings to the table for this team, and I think he could be very good. Another guy on offense that I'm looking forward to seeing is, honestly, any of the offensive linemen, to be honest, but I'm really interested to see what Bo Stanley's going to bring for this team, because he's a guy that is very versatile, has played multiple positions on the offensive line, played some center, played some tackle. Those are probably the two most important positions on the line, in my opinion, especially at center, where you're losing Vershawn Lee. You don't have him back. So we'll see if Stanley ends up playing center or another position, but that's a guy right there that I'm very interested to see. On defense, there are multiple ways you could go with this. I think number one, the guy from Alabama, Justin Okoronkwo. I'm still learning his name to this day.
That's it.
Yep. He's a guy that it seems a lot of people are high on, and me included, not just for the fact he came from Alabama and stuff, but a guy that a lot of people are just really high on in general. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do at the linebacker position. I expect him to potentially be a day one starter. And then I think you can go really any way with the rest of the group here on defense. But another guy on the defensive line, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy, I think from A&M, is a guy that, look, you're losing a lot of talent on that defensive line, probably as much as any position that South Carolina has from this season. He's a guy that, former 5-star guy, goes to A&M, was recruited by South Carolina, I believe, out of high school. I'm interested to see what his role is going to be. And I think he's a guy that, look, with the defensive line having a lot of holes that were filled and stuff and a lot of unknowns going into this upcoming season, I think this is a guy that you can count on being one of those day one starters that hopefully makes a big impact.
All right, Jack, great stuff as always. I really wish the Bills were in the Super Bowl. But,
me too, man.
Addison probably wouldn't want to watch, so at least I'll have another Super Bowl with her after we get back from Austin from watching South Carolina's women and Texas earlier in the day. Jack, great stuff as always. We got to get you back to talk Gamecock baseball. I mean, at this point, I think a lot of people, it's spring football, baseball, and women's basketball are going to be the three main topics of interest moving forward. And then the transfer portal for Lamont Paris after the season. Great stuff as always. Thanks for jumping on with us, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
Appreciate it, my man. Thanks so much.
All right, that was Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central, and since he joined us right off the top, let's as we await Lulu Kesin from the Greenville News, formerly of the Ringer, to discuss what an impressive run by Dawn Staley's team, becoming only the third team in the last 25 years to play and defeat 5 straight ranked opponents, including 2 top 5 wins in that against Texas and LSU. So some Nana's Porch News notes and headlines, again brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area. Nana's Porch, your go-to for all your catering needs. And again, go to nanasporch.com, put your order in today, order plenty of pimento cheese in time for your Super Bowl spread. All right, Asia Wilson was named the USA Women's Basketball Female Athlete of the Year. She's the GOAT, let's face it. She's got the statue right in front of, South Carolina at Colonial Life Arena. She was MVP of the 2024 Paris Olympic Games, averaging 18.7 points and 10.2 rebounds. Also, almost 3 blocks and 1.5 steals per game. She is just the second player in USA history to lead the team in 4 major statistical categories at an Olympics. So congratulations to the GOAT. Asia Wilson, Gamecock signee Isla McDonald from Houston was named to the McDonald's All-America team. No shock there. She becomes the 21st Dawn Staley signee that made McDonald's All-American, and 6 McDonald's All-Americans transferred into the program. That'll make 27 McDonald's All-Americans that have played for Dawn Staley. Isla McDowell, a native of Brazil. She's played on their international team. Her senior season at Cypress Springs, she averaged 25 points, 8 rebounds, 3.4 assists, 3.1 steals, and 1.4 blocks per game. 51% from the floor, including 42% from 3. This is a 6'2" guard here. She led her team to a 24-3 record, 11-0 in district play. Her team is number 3 in 6A as they go for a state championship. She's the number 22 player in the latest ESPN Top 100. She will play on the West team with Aaliyah Chavez, the number 1 player in the country who is considering South Carolina. On the East team, the number 4 player in the class of 2025, 6'1", Toronto native, Agot Maker. She has a Final 3 of South Carolina, Connecticut, and Michigan State. She said on Monday she will make her announcement within the next 2 weeks. She may announce at the McDonald's game. South Carolina, I don't know if they're the favorites, but let's face it, there's no environment in like Colonial Life Arena for women's basketball, and Dawn Staley has the premier program in the country. Michigan State is much closer to her Toronto home. And UConn, let's face it, Gino, he's the GOAT. So we'll see what happens there. 9 Gamecocks, former Gamecocks, will be playing in college football all-star games this week and into the weekend. 6 former Gamecocks will take place in the 100th edition of the East-West Shrine Game, set for tomorrow night in Arlington at AT&T Stadium. The game will be televised on the NFL Network with kickoff set for 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 local time. O'Donnell Fortune, Tonka Hemingway, Kai Kroger, Rocket Sanders, and Josh Simon will play for the East team. Bam Martin Scott, a late addition, will play for the West team. 3 former Gamecocks will compete at the Senior Bowl on Saturday, February 1st, on the campus of South Alabama. This is the longest running continual all-star game for the past 76 years. Kickoff is set for 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 local time. Kyle Kennard, Demetrius Knight, and TJ Sanders will represent the Gamecocks. Also, Rocket Sanders and Kyle Kennard named first team academic All-American. And that is a great honor for all of those dudes. Now let's go back out and welcome back into the program our go-to for women's basketball coverage, Lulu Kesin of the Greenville News, formerly of The Ringer. Lulu, you got to witness history over the last 5 games. South Carolina becomes just the 3rd team in the last 25 years to defeat 5 consecutive ranked opponents, including 2 top 5 opponents. And let's just go ahead and address the controversy after the LSU game. Kim Mulkey so sulky in the post-game press conference, bemoaning the fact that Dawn Staley has 10 All-Americans. She just can't accept the fact that she is not the queen of SEC basketball like she was when she was at Baylor. She had 9 or 10 McDonald's All-Americans on her roster. And then I want to get your take on the DJ playing the song Camouflage by Floje Johnson's deceased father.
Well, I definitely think it's funny timing about the All-American stuff because yesterday or 2 days ago, Monday, like the new round, obviously 2025 All-Americans were released, and I believe LSU has 2, and South Carolina obviously just has 1 commit so far, McDowell, who is an All-American. So it was a little bit silly timing-wise. In a sense, I thought that Kim's point was complimentary of South Carolina, just trying to, draw attention to the fact that their roster is loaded. But it definitely is an interesting excuse in the sense that other teams have kind of developed these talented rosters as well. And South Carolina isn't just like hogging all of the All-Americans in women's college basketball. And Dawn knows how to recruit. Obviously, she knows how to keep kids in the program. And so sort of in the sense of one, I was just kind of on deadline and hyper-focused on a lot of things. I was taking it in the sense of that's just Kim's unique way of complimenting Dawn in South Carolina without fully saying it. But obviously there's All-Americans on LSU's roster as well. South Carolina doesn't own all of them. And it definitely hasn't prevented some teams from beating South Carolina so far. Obviously UCLA found a way around that, and other teams in the past have, not last year. But that's all just to say Kim is always going to be Kim. And I think that this loss especially was probably one where LSU, in my eyes, on paper, maybe had the best chance. I don't think last year it was necessarily the same type of game both times. So I do definitely think that a lot of the hype played into the fact that she was very animated about the fact that South Carolina, quote unquote, has all the All-Americans.
I agree, but you look at it, you return every player off a 38-0 national championship team except one, and now a true freshman has become your best and most consistent player in Joyce Edwards. Dawn Staley mentioning in one of her recent interviews that she thinks one day Joyce Edwards will be the best player in women's college basketball. I go back, I watched Asia Wilson play as a true freshman. I watched Aaliyah Boston play as a true freshman. They were probably surrounded by just as good, if not better, players than this year's team, which is kind of a head scratcher when you consider everybody returns off that team except Camila Cardoso, but not the consistency that we saw from a lot of these players last year. But Joyce Edwards, you played basketball, you watch her play. For a freshman, I just can't ever remember a more deliberate, skilled player the moment is never too big or too fast, even though she has missed more layups and more free throws. But talk about her footwork and her patience in the post and how she just completely dismantles a one-on-one matchup. She's rolling like Kevin McHale used to in the post for the Celtics. I know you've probably seen a lot of videos of that. That was before your time. But her post moves and her footwork, I just think, are unequaled for a true freshman in a major league like the SEC.
Totally. And I think something that's so great about Joyce is that with all that good, there are still like pockets of areas where you're like, she's a freshman, she'll learn. And I think that's what allows Dawn Staley to feel so comfortable talking about her future, is because she's seeing what she's, witnessing every game, but she knows she has not even reached her ceiling. Like there's so much for her to continue to learn and do and grow. And that's all after she's displaying, like you were saying, this just incredible pace and kind of poise and timing. When you're a good post player in the SEC, a lot of the times people assume that's solely, height or power or kind of strength. But patience is kind of often ignored. I think like game recognition and IQ. And I think Joyce does a really good job reading the defense. I think that's what kind of separates her from other posts, in this league, in this conference, but also in college basketball, is because her just instant game recognition, sort of similar to what I've said about Tessa Johnson, where she's never too worried because no matter what the defense gives her, she's going to create from that. She talks about that all the time. People will be like, oh, you had such a great game. And she's just kind of like, yeah, I was just kind of like working off of what the defense was giving me. And that's just kind of unheard of as a freshman, that you're not, you're playing against Madison Booker or Reagan Beers. You're playing against these, prolific scorers. And then on the other end, they're defending you. And she's kind of like, I know within myself, I'm able to make a move no matter how they're guarding me, whether they're giving me space and forcing me to kind of play outside and shoot the short kind of like hook shot, which we've seen her make many times, or she's kind of able to separate herself by putting the ball on the floor because she has ball handling skills and she's able to make a move to go by a defender that's playing her really tight. So, I mean, Joyce is phenomenal to watch. It's kind of fun when you see. I definitely don't think anything necessarily is ever too big for her. I definitely think sometimes, and as of late, as you're saying, like you see the visible frustration on her face, or kind of like the when the layup like rims out, and it's sort of like, okay, yeah, she's a freshman. She's going to learn that, in 2 minutes, she's still able to get an and one, even if she missed a free throw. So that's all to say, like, I really hear what Dawn Staley is saying in the sense that Joyce is not only playing, as she said, the right way right now, but she has so much room to grow. And I think that's arguably the most exciting part, is that she's truly only a freshman.
I mean, she is the leading scorer on the team. She's still shooting over 56% from the field. Up until the last couple of games, where she's had some free throw problems, which have really been uncharacteristic for her. She was over an 80% free throw shooter. That's down to about 75% now. Dawn said she's played, I think, 27 or 29 minutes against Tennessee. She probably needs to get 5 or 6 more minutes. I agree. Let's talk about the LSU game, because I thought that was really the game. Like, it turned out to just be a 10-point game. South Carolina did build a 14-point lead in that one. After the first quarter, it turned into a rock fight for both teams, really. But you just saw South Carolina's defense in these last 2 games, I think, probably caused some fatigue on offense because they were just defending at a high level. I mean, LSU was like 30 points under their season average. Not a big surprise when you consider most of their games were against the Acme School for Typewriter Maintenance in their non-conference schedule. But look at their big three were all attempting, like they had more field goal attempts than they had points, all of them. Like Flau'jae Johnson, like 5 or 6 for 19 from the field, 15 points. Anissa Morrow, even though she had a double-double, she had way more shot attempts than total points. They just could not score. I thought LSU was fortunate to only lose by 10 because South Carolina had probably a dozen layups that just spun out. That game could easily have been a 20-point blowout.
Yeah, and I honestly feel more confident looking at that game for South Carolina than I do like the Texas win. And that's because South Carolina won a very physical, close game. And I think those are kind of very important to have on your resume, especially heading into February. So that's kind of exactly to your point. Like South Carolina really could have won by more if they made more layups. Like both teams in the second quarter, there's just a lid on the basket. Like everyone was missing bunnies. No one could hit from the 3-point line. You know, like you mentioned, like Anissa Morrow had a double-double, never really had the type of game she was having. Flau'jae Johnson was great, but wasn't necessarily putting up the 20 points per game that she was doing. So I think the way South Carolina contained LSU was incredibly impressive, and that the fact that they did that without a cushion of a 40-point lead was really, really big. Offensively, there was just a lot better ball movement and flow, you know, once kind of the shots started hitting. I just love watching Sanaya Fagan play basketball as of late. I think she's really flourishing and coming into her own, and has like, my kind of argument from day one was that she didn't need to do what Joyce is doing. She just needed to do what she's doing now. You know, she was kind of slow adjusting to being a starter, but now she's having these, you know, anywhere from like 8 to 12-point games. And that's crucial. She hits those little like short jumpers right off the gate. She forces defenders to play her closer. And then that obviously spreads out the defense and opens up just more opportunities. So I think LSU, that game, South Carolina definitely showed like, okay, we can win tight, close games because they're going to happen. We're not going to blow out, you know, top 15 opponents by 40 every time. It's not always going to be like a Texas or an Oklahoma. Obviously, they saw that against Tennessee where they had a 22-point lead turn into a 6-point lead. So South Carolina weathered the LSU storm really well, and that win was incredibly important and impressive, in my opinion.
So let's get to the Tennessee game. Obviously, they present a unique challenge in that they are a special preparation. They press for 40 minutes. They roll 5 players in at a time, something I really wouldn't mind seeing South Carolina do now that Maddie McDaniel is back to full health. But again, South Carolina clamped down on Tennessee, just 23 of 75 from the field, and a lot of those in the fourth quarter. Even, you know, South Carolina, I think, scored 8 straight points to end the first quarter. At one point, they had an 18-1 run to build a 15-point lead that Tennessee was able to cut into by getting 5 straight points to end the half. But South Carolina ran away from Tennessee in the second and third quarter, and then it went up to 22. And then, was it fatigue? Was it Malaysia Fulwiley becoming the Will Rogers of women's basketball and never seeing a shot she didn't like? I mean, I thought in the fourth quarter of that game, before she got pulled out, you could have faked her a pass and she would have shot it. Or did they just relax because they were up 22? It was the end of 5 straight games with no break. They knew they were going to have a break on Thursday before playing Auburn on Sunday. Or was it just some of all of that?
I think it was definitely fatigue. I think as Dawn said, like bad shots. I don't necessarily think South Carolina got content. I genuinely think that when you're tired and I don't want to say overworked, but just like mentally drained, you sort of start making poor decisions. I think they were just mentally tired, physically tired, and Tennessee took advantage at the right time. I mean, Tennessee was missing a lot of shots. And so when all of a sudden South Carolina isn't making every shot on the other end, the game is bound to even out in one way. And momentum swung towards Tennessee and kind of, like I said, I kind of just look at it as South Carolina was just a little bit drained mentally, physically, and Tennessee was able to kind of capitalize.
Yeah, 17 turnovers for the Gamecocks. 2 by Maddie McDaniel, who got sped up and tried to think she was high school Helen and just dribble through the press. You don't do that. You pass to beat the press. When South Carolina did that, they got layup after layup. They got open shots. I really thought, though, outside of those 2 turnovers in her 12 minutes, I thought she was really good for South Carolina. I think that's another weapon down the stretch. But I really think you just have a conundrum with Malaysia Fulwiley because she's, to quote Forrest Gump, like a box of chocolates. You just never know what you're going to get. I mean, yeah, she hit 3 straight threes in the first half, but she missed 4 layups. And then she comes back in the fourth quarter and jacks up 4 straight threes that led to runouts by Tennessee and really changed the momentum. I mean, she's just unpredictable at this point.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an issue right now. I think she needs to be a lot smarter with her decisions. And I definitely think that it's masked by made shots in some occasions. I think in the first half, obviously, she picked up some fouls and then hit 2 threes, and everyone was kind of like, myself included, was like, okay, like she's fine, whatever. And then towards the end, it's just sort of like very questionable shot selection. And I don't want to keep using the excuse like, oh, she's young, because this is what she told me, that she wants to work on and be better at. And so I just think that it's going to come with time, and eventually she will, but it's definitely troublesome in certain moments for sure. I mean, it matters a lot less when they're up 40 on Oklahoma than it does when they're in a tight game versus Tennessee. So even recognizing that in even if she's not immediately able to stop with kind of these questionable decisions, at the very least, she needs to understand kind of where everyone is at in the game in that moment.
No doubt. So are we to the point to where we're concerned about Tahina Paopao and her 3-point shooting? She has just not been near as consistent as last year. There were stretches in SEC play where teams clamped down on her. I was encouraged that she is still going to the basket more. She's got the runner. She's getting to the free throw line a little bit. But we just have not seen, and last year, percentage-wise, she was the number 1 3-point shooter in the country. Not in volume, but by percentage. This year, not so much.
Yeah, I'm not concerned, only because I think she's developing her 2-point game a little bit more. And I think if she just wasn't shooting anything else but threes and not making them, I think that's concerning. But I think what's been really great for their offense is that she's attacking the basket a lot more. And, she's able to see the floor better than most guards in college basketball. And so I'm personally not concerned about the percentage aspect of her from the 3-point line right now, just because she is still impacting the game in positive ways otherwise. And I think that's just probably part of her looking to kind of develop her skill set as a player, obviously in her last year of college basketball.
No doubt. So 38 more bench points. South Carolina, the only team in the country that their bench averages more points per game than the starters. I think that goes to the depth of South Carolina. And I think, yes, you have the same 5 starters, right? Every single game. Regardless, because of the depth of South Carolina, they're going to be able to figure out, Dawn Staley is going to figure out how many players it takes to get the right 5 on the floor at the right time, and particularly at closing time. And I think that's where the depth really comes in, and the sulky, mulky complaints about the 10 McDonald's All-Americans. Hey, go out and get your own. Okay. There was a time when McDonald's All-Americans, believe it or not, were turning down Dawn Staley to come to South Carolina. So I would like to see more consistency from Tessa Johnson. I thought Raven had one of her best games. I think she's at her best when the floor is open and she can play in transition. I did think she had one of the ugliest layup attempts in the history of college football in that game, though, where she just kind of, I don't know if her steps were off or what, but it just looked awkward. Breezy Hall, no points for her, 0 for 4 from the field. Sanaya Fagan saddled with foul trouble, but like you, I am still encouraged about her. And so at this point, barring a slip up, you've got 2 huge games left on the schedule, back-to-back Sundays, Super Bowl Sunday at Texas, and then the following Sunday, UConn at Colonial Life Arena. And then you're going to have the SEC tournament where you could face Tennessee and LSU back-to-back games. Who knows what that schedule is going to look like. Just your thoughts on these 2 huge top 10 matchups with Texas. Which, let's face it, they're not going to shoot, 9% in the first quarter at home.
Right. That's, I think, the biggest thing I'm thinking about in terms of the future is Texas isn't going to shoot as poorly as they did. Madison Booker is not going to miss as many pretty much open layups as she did. And so leading up to the game, I'm definitely going to kind of talk to Dawn about that, or kind of get her thoughts on preparing for a matchup again when a lot of what went wrong for the other team was just missed shots in terms of just changing scout and things like that. But definitely need to understand, South Carolina needs to understand that Texas playing at home is going to be a lot different than they were playing on the road. Like we said, they're not going to shoot as badly. They're going to have a chip on their shoulder. They're frustrated by how the first matchup went for sure. And then South Carolina comes home and plays UConn. I'm honestly just very excited for Sarah Strong and Joyce Edwards to share the court. Yeah. I think that's just going to be great and such good basketball. So that will be super exciting. And a lot of other coaches have kind of said Sarah Strong, like, you can't even prepare for how good she is. Like, she's just a different level than she is on film. And what better coach to prepare for a player like that than Dawn Staley? So I'm excited to see kind of which of the 2 top 3 freshmen in the country from the class of 2025 like show up that day. That's going to be fun to watch. And then obviously anytime Paige is in Colonial Life Arena, like, that's just going to be great as well. She's definitely one that's not necessarily fazed by any crowds, and she'll be a tough matchup, I imagine, for Bree Hall or Raven Johnson. So that's, I think, selfishly, I'm more just like very excited for the UConn game because it's going to be such great, basketball and opponents and things like that, where I think Texas is a lot more stressful in the sense that South Carolina has a lot to worry about knowing how Texas played the first time around.
I mean, no doubt. So, I mean, let's look at UConn if you want to talk about McDonald's All-Americans. Paige Beckers, Azzi Fudd, KK Arnold, Ashlyn Shade, Sarah Strong, Ice Brady, Caroline Ducharme, Anaya Patterson, Aubrey Griffin. I mean, you could make the case UConn's roster is just as talented as UCLA or South Carolina.
Right. And they have a lot of
no excuses for Juno with injuries this year.
Yeah. And I think too, they have very similar like players. Like I think you have someone that can kind of defend and alter the tone, like similarly like KK Arnold and Raven Johnson. Like there's a lot of kind of stylistically similarities between those two rosters, which again makes that game kind of that much more interesting, especially it being a non-conference game in February.
I agree. And when I watch UConn play and I see Sarah Strong, I see a completely different player than in high school. They've done a great job reshaping her body, a lot like Madison Booker from her freshman year to sophomore year. She's a lot leaner. She's a lot quicker, and she is a prolific three-point shooter. I mean, I saw Allison play in high school, and I coached her dad, Danny Strong, in AAU, and had to coach against him when he was at Great Falls and I was at Bethune. When you come from two parents, one who went to Harvard, two who played professional basketball, Danny Strong played at NC State and in the ACC, played professionally. Allison was the number one player in the country out of Chester. I can't wait for that. She grew up dreaming of playing at UConn. I think Dawn at one point thought she might turn the tide with her, but it didn't happen. But it's not just those two, because it is still Paige Beckers and KK Arnold and Cadence Samuels, Ashlyn Shade, Caitlin Chin, Azzy Fudd, who was considered a generational player who has had her career impacted by injuries, Aubrey Griffin, who's coming back, who's a great athlete in her own right. Her dad was an NBA player. So these games are going to be huge. But let's talk about Sunday. South Carolina has the record for most consecutive SEC regular season wins at 55. They have a 69-game home win streak. I did not realize this, but evidently no SEC team in history has won 70 or more games consecutively at home. And so South Carolina, Sunday, they face Auburn. That will be another chance for Dawn Staley to add another record in her legacy as the coach at South Carolina.
Yes, on a day when they're celebrating the most legendary player, Asia Wilson, with her jersey retirement. So I think that comes at a good time. That's not to say I do believe anyone in the SEC can beat anyone on any given day. I'm a superstitious person, and I'm also the type of person that likes to always root for an underdog. So I'm not going to sit here and, say for 1,000% sure South Carolina is going to blow out Auburn. What I am saying is that I think it's good that they had this rest and they're able to reset. Like Dawn was saying, it would be very difficult if they played, Auburn yesterday or Monday and then Tennessee on Sunday, kind of like having a lot of games, maybe a mental break, and then, getting back into it with a tough game. So I think just right now, South Carolina needed the reset and needed to kind of get their feet back under them and just focus on the second half of SEC play, and what better way to start than a home game where you're honoring Asia Wilson.
No doubt about it. South Carolina now with 9 wins against ranked opponents. That's the most in the country. Obviously, they are number one in the net rankings. I think they could be number one in the NCAA rankings when they have their reveal, even over UCLA, just because of strength of schedule. And I'm waiting for those UCLA Southern Cal games in Big Ten play. But South Carolina's got to take care of their own business. to stay on that one line. Who knows what will happen? I can't thank you enough, Lulu, for being with us. All your great work at the Greenville News, covering women's basketball. So last question. We know Isla McDowell made McDonald's All-American. Agot Maker, the number 4 player in the class, also a McDonald's All-American. She is set to announce her top 3: South Carolina, UConn, Michigan State. What's your thought process as we lead up to that decision?
Well, I think a lot of it naturally, and maybe this is a dumb answer, but I think will kind of depend on how South Carolina versus UConn goes in that game and everything like that. And I think that Dawn, obviously, I think Dawn has a very creative and genuine way of recruiting. And so in a sense, I don't want to say it's secretive, because obviously no aspect of recruiting can ultimately be that secretive, but she sort of is able to let a lot of her game and the players' game like speak for itself. And that's an advantage. Like, not every team that is one of the best is making history every night the way Dawn is. And so I feel like a lot of what's been going on now is very attractive to recruits.
I agree. South Carolina had in for the LSU game the number 1 post player in the class of 2026. Olivia Edwards, who was born in Atlanta, moved to Tacoma, Washington. She is an elite player. She's probably still growing. She was on hand for that LSU game in that environment. I talked to some people who said that's the loudest they've ever heard Colonial Life Arena. But she's not just a dunker. She's a two-handed dunker, something we hadn't seen Ashlyn Watkins do. I think that's the final frontier for South Carolina women's basketball, is to land a West Coast player. They've come up short on a number of highly ranked California players. They have gone into Texas back-to-back years to get one of the top players in Texas. But with Sanaya Fagan leaving, and with a need for an elite post player, I think that's going to be an interesting recruitment to watch. But Southern Cal and UCLA, the same, not that far away from home. So, but I do think that's a great first step to have a player come out cross country to see a top 5 matchup her junior year.
For sure. I would say that's the loudest. I mean, I've only been here a year, but that's the loudest Colonial Life Arena has ever been in my eyes and with my ears. So definitely to have her there for that game was probably very, very huge for South Carolina.
So I will say the 2021, I think, was it 2020 or 2021 UConn game, the first time South Carolina beat UConn at home, you had Raven Johnson, Sanaya Fagan, Breezy Hall, and Sanaya Rivers, which made up a number 1 class in the country. All of them were in attendance at that game, and they all pointed to that as a major factor. I think Dawn Staley's hoping the LSU game could be a deciding factor for Olivia Edwards. More to come. February is still coming, and then March, the SEC tournament, the women's tournament. I do believe if South Carolina finishes on the 1 line, Birmingham certainly could be a very favorable venue for them in the NCAA tournament.
For sure. Well, yeah. lots to come.
All right, Lulu, great stuff as always. Thanks for joining us. Be well. And are you coming to Austin on Super Bowl Sunday?
I will be in Austin. Yes, I can't wait.
All right, so Addison and I are going to have floor seats for that. I got to hook up with somebody inside the Texas women's basketball program.
Awesome.
So I'll try to look you up before the game on Press Row if I can.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, definitely do. And thanks as always for having me. Great to chat.
All right, take care, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road.
All right, bye.
All right, that was Lulu Kesin from the Greenville News. Great stuff as always. So spring football right around the corner. Shane Beamer saying they will start on March the 19th. The spring game will be on Friday Night Lights, the Friday before Easter on April 18th. I like that because all the recruits are out of school. A lot of them are going to be going to spring games on Saturday. Hey, now they can come to Columbia, spend the day on Friday, tour the facilities, go to the Carolina spring game, and take off for their next destination on Saturday. That way you don't have to share with everybody. I'm excited about this group of newcomers and transfers. I wanted to add my guys that I'm looking at. On defense, to me, it does start up front with Jalen Brown, 6'6", 260-pound, four-star transfer from Missouri. I'm extremely high on him. I think he's got a shot to perhaps earn a starting spot, if not be in the two deep. Certainly Gabriel Dendy, the former five-star and the number one junior college player in the country, Xavier Hardy at defensive tackle. I think those guys need to make a major move in spring practice for Shane Beamer and his team. Then I'm going to go with Jack Veltri and say Justin Okoronkwo. He's the real deal, folks. 6'3", 230, sub 4.5 in the 40, 4.06 in the shuttle, which is elite. For a man that size, a 38-inch vertical leap, played in every game as a true freshman at Alabama. In the A-Day game, 3 months after arriving on campus from Munich, Germany, where high school football Skiza is like 6A compared to Germany high school football, he had 12 tackles in the A-Day game. He wanted to go somewhere where he could start. I think he and J.R. Johnson will be the starting linebackers. Sean Murphy as well, a former four-star guy and a top 50 recruit. And then I think Brandon Cisse, the Sumter native and a guy who can play corner and nickel, along with Vakari Swain and Judge Collier, one of those guys, either I think Cisse or Swain plays nickel. That allows you to move Jalen Kilgore back to his natural position of free safety to team up with DQ Smith back there. I also think Miles Norwood, the transfer corner from Ball State, will be one of the fastest players on the team. He will help out. Then on offense, nobody's talking about this guy because you got Lenora Sellers coming back, but Prentice Air Noland, 6'2", 220. I think he's so good, he's going to need to play, and I think he's going to have to play, particularly early in the season. So if Lenora Sellers does go out, he's not going to be a game manager, folks. He is like a young Michael Penix Jr. He's left-handed. He's an elite passer. He's a 4.5, 40 guy that can extend plays, but that is just very accurate as a passer. I agree with Rasul Faison, but I think Jawarn Howell may be too talented to keep off the field. We'll see his development. I think at wide receiver, I think it's huge that Nick Harbor's going through spring. A guy that came in late as a transfer at wide receiver, Vandrevis Jacobs. He was hampered by injuries and the fact that he didn't come in until the summer. So I think spring is big for him, but Malik Clark, Jaden Sellers, Jordan Gidron, Brian Rowe, and Lex Cyrus, who's a 10-400 meters guy. And then maybe the most talented of all of them, Donovan Murph, comes in this summer. South Carolina is not going to have any issues at wide receiver. And then on the offensive line, Boaz Stanley, the transfer portal center, a JUCO All-American center, a lot like Vershawn Lee, a guy that has position versatility, but I think is a natural center. We'll see him there. Where does Big Tree Babalade play? Is it left guard? I wish they'd give him a shot at right tackle. It doesn't look like that will be the case. And then Nick Sharp from Wake Forest, turning heads in the weight room, a very experienced guy, as is Rodney Newsom. There's going to be some major competition at those guard spots. And then what happens with Marquis Anderson and Trevon Ball if they're not starters this year out of spring? Do they hit the transfer portal? I mean, I'm just saying, we'll have to see, but it's going to be a huge spring. We'll have it all covered here. Coming up, hopefully in a couple of weeks, we're going to have Brad Crawford on the show. We're going to be getting Michael W. Bratton on the show. We'll be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, special thanks to Jack Veltri and Lulu Kesin. Thanks to all of you watching live and listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all of my Gamecock family on Patreon. Until next week, Keith Allsep saying God bless, go Gamecocks, and LP, let's get a dub. Let's break the streak. I'm out of here.